The cowboy froze in the middle of the dusty street as the Apache girl stepped forward, her voice cutting sharp through the silence. "Do you remember me, cowboy? You promised to have a child with me." Faces turned, whispers rippled. What bond tied them together, and what would happen now that her words echoed before everyone? Heat shimmered above the dirt road, the town heavy with the smell of sweat, horses, and sun-baked wood. Cowboys leaned on porch rails. Women paused with baskets in hand, all drawn by the tension unfolding at the center of the street. The Apache girl stood tall, her dark hair braided with beads that glinted in the light. Her eyes burned with certainty as she looked at the man before her, a cowboy with dust on his boots and a revolver hanging loose at his hip. He hadn't moved since she spoke. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, but his lips gave no answer. "You promised," she said again, louder this time, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You gave me your word." Gasps rippled among the onlookers. A promise between a cowboy and an Apache girl. Such words were dangerous in a world divided by blood and pride. The man's hand twitched at his side. His face was weathered, guarded, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, memory, whispers grew. What's she saying? Did he really? Why would a cowboy? The girl took a step closer, her bracelets jangling softly, her tone softened, though it cut deeper for it. Or was I only a shadow to you? A night you forgot when the sun rose? The cowboy's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, then shut it, the weight of every eye pressing down. He remembered the night by the river, the words spoken under stars. When war seemed far away and promises came too easily, he had sworn to her then, thinking it would never matter. But now, here she was, her gaze unflinching, reminding him that words carry more than desire. They carry destiny. The silence between them stretched, sharp as a drawn blade. The girl's voice lowered, meant only for him, though all could hear. "You gave me your vow, cowboy, and now I have come to claim it." The street held its breath. Dust hung in the air, swirling lazily as if time itself had slowed. The cowboy shifted his weight, boots grinding on the dirt, but he did not look away from her. His silence was not strength, it was fear. Around them, the townsfolk lingered, drawn to the storm brewing. Men muttered under their hats. Women leaned close to one another. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. A promise was sacred here, even more so when it crossed the fragile line between settler and Apache. To break it was not just betrayal, it was scandal. The girl stood tall, shoulders squared, her beauty undeniable yet sharpened by fire in her eyes. She was not pleading. She was not ashamed. She was demanding what had been spoken beneath the stars, words she had carried while he had buried them. At last, the cowboy spoke, his voice low, rough as gravel. "That night by the river, it was nothing more than words. You know it." Her head lifted, defiance radiating from her. "Nothing more. You swore. You looked into my eyes and promised me a child, a life, a bond no one could break." The crowd stirred, whispers hissing like snakes. The sheriff stepped out from the saloon, resting his hand on his belt. He didn't interfere yet, but his eyes stayed sharp. The cowboy clenched his jaw, shame and anger warring in his chest. He remembered that night too clearly, the river's murmur, the stars scattered bright, her hand warm in his. He had spoken those words, carried away by the moment, never believing they would follow him back into the harsh daylight of the town. "Those were words spoken in foolishness," he muttered. "I can't be held to them." The girl's lips curved into something between a smile and a wound. "Foolishness to you. To me, they were truth. To my people, they were binding." A man in the crowd barked a laugh. "A cowboy tied to an Apache girl, that'll be the day." Others chuckled nervously, but no one stepped closer. Even mockery couldn't hide the unease. Her voice cut through them like a blade. "Laugh if you wish, but the river remembers. The stars remember, and so does he." The cowboy's hand drifted unconsciously toward his revolver, not to draw it, but as if the weight steadied him. His eyes swept the crowd, feeling the judgment pressing harder with every breath. If he denied her here, in front of everyone, he would not only shame her, he would brand himself a liar. The sheriff finally stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Best settle this quiet. Promises spoken under the stars have a way of turning into curses if broken." The cowboy shot him a look, but the sheriff didn't flinch. The girl took a step closer, her bracelets clinking softly. Her voice lowered, though the weight of it carried, You can deny me before them, Cowboy, but can you deny me before yourself? His throat worked, but no sound came. Her words sliced through every wall he had built. He thought of the life he had chosen, wandering, drifting, never rooted, never bound. He thought of the emptiness that followed him no matter where he rode. And then he thought of her, the night by the river, when for a fleeting moment he had believed in something more. His silence was answer enough. The crowd began to disperse, whispers trailing. The sheriff lingered, giving him a look that was both warning and pity. "Reckon you got yourself a storm, son. Best decide whether you ride it or get struck down by it." The girl turned then, her chin high, her gaze unbroken. She didn't wait for him to follow, didn't beg, didn't plead. She walked down the street, every step echoing like a drumbeat, leaving him rooted in the dust. But her words lingered, sharper than any blade. "You promised me a child." And the cowboy knew, no matter how far he tried to ride, no matter how deep he tried to bury that night, she would not let him forget. The Apache girl leaves the cowboy standing in shame before the whole town, her words echoing like a curse. He must now choose whether to face the promise he made, or watch it destroy him. The saloon was quieter than usual that evening. Lamps flickered low, casting long shadows across warped wooden floors. A piano stood silent, its keys covered in dust. The cowboy sat at a corner table, a bottle of whiskey half drained before him, his hat pulled low over his brow. The laughter of the crowd outside had faded hours ago, but the words of the Apache girl still rang in his ears. "You promised me a child. No bullet wound could sting sharper." He poured another glass, and his hand unsteady. The burn of the whiskey did nothing to drown the memory. Her face lit by moonlight, the river whispering around them, her voice soft but certain as she made him vow. He had been younger then, reckless, convinced tomorrow would never come. Now tomorrow had found him. The door creaked open. The sheriff stepped inside, his boots heavy against the floorboards. He didn't bother with greetings, just pulled a chair and sat across from him. "You plan on drinking yourself through this storm?" the sheriff asked, his tone level. The cowboy didn't lift his head. "Don't see what business it is of yours." "It's the town's business if you drag blood into the streets," the sheriff said, "and it's mine if you plan on breaking a promise loud enough for every soul to hear." The cowboy's jaw clenched. It was a mistake. Words spoken to pass the night. She knew that. The sheriff leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Did she? Or did you let her believe something you never intended to keep?" The cowboy slammed his glass down, whiskey sloshing. "You think I wanted this? To be called out like a liar in front of everyone?" The sheriff's gaze stayed steady. "Doesn't matter what you wanted. Matters what you said. Out here, words weigh as heavy as bullets." Silence stretched. The cowboy rubbed a hand over his face. "Weary. I can't give her what she asks. My life ain't meant for roots. I can't be tied down." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then stood. "Maybe so, but she doesn't strike me as the kind to let go easy. And if you keep running, son, sooner or later, you'll find yourself with no place left to hide." He left without another word, the door swinging shut behind him. The cowboy sat alone, the bottle empty now, the weight of his choices pressing heavy. His mind flashed with images he tried to banish, the girl's eyes under the stars, the warmth of her hand, the laughter that had once slipped so easily between them. He had buried it all under years of wandering, but tonight she had dug it up, piece by piece until he could no longer deny it. Across town, the Apache girl sat by a small fire outside her people's camp. Her face was calm, but her heart pounded. She had spoken the words she had carried for so long, forcing him to remember, yet she knew his silence did not mean surrender. It meant resistance. Her grandmother sat beside her, weaving strands of leather. "You shook the town," the old woman said softly, "and you shook him." The girl's gaze stayed fixed on the flames. "He thinks he can run from his word, but the river remembers." "So do I." Her grandmother's eyes glinted with pride. "Then what will you do?" "I'll remind him again," the girl said. "Not with shame, but with truth. I'll make him see what he promised was more than words." The fire cracked, sparks rising into the dark. She held them in her eyes, her resolve unbroken. Meanwhile, the cowboy stumbled out of the saloon into the cool night. The streets were empty, the town hushed. He leaned against a post, his chest heavy, eyes burning with something he could not name. Guilt, anger, longing, maybe all at once. He whispered into the darkness, "What have I done?" But no answer came, only the sound of the wind carrying her voice through memory. "You gave me your vow. Alone with his guilt, the cowboy drowns himself in whiskey while the Apache girl prepares her next move, determined to prove his promise was no passing fancy, but a bond he cannot escape. The night was deep when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door of the cowboy's rented room above the saloon. He stirred from restless half-sleep, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his side. Another knock followed, softer this time, almost patient. He pushed himself up, every muscle tense, and opened the door a crack. She stood there, framed by moonlight, her face calm, but her eyes burning. The Apache girl. "You knew I'd come," she said simply. He hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered without waiting for permission, the faint jingle of her bracelets breaking the silence. The room smelled of stale whiskey and dust. She looked around once, then fixed her gaze on him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of the promise hung between them, heavier than iron chains. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice rough. "Why are you here? Haven't you shamed me enough before the whole town?" Her chin lifted. "This isn't about shame, this is about truth. You can hide behind your bottle, your silence, even your gun, but you can't hide from what you said to me." He rubbed a hand over his jaw, turning away. "I was young, reckless. We both were. Promises made in the dark don't always hold in the daylight." Her voice sharpened, cutting through his excuse. "Maybe not for you, but I carried those words every day. Through winters, through hunger, through nights when I thought I would never see you again. They weren't just words, they were hope." The cowboy flinched, her words striking deeper than he wanted to admit. He remembered her laughter by the river, the way her eyes had softened when he swore his vow. He had wanted to believe himself sincere, even if he had not understood the weight. She stepped closer, her presence filling the small room. "You think you can walk away, but every time you do, you carry a lie with you, and lies rot men from the inside." He bristled, anger rising to mask the guilt gnawing at him. "What do you expect me to do? Marry you, settle down, raise a child when I can barely keep myself alive?" Her expression didn't falter. "Yes, that is exactly what I expect, because you promised." The bluntness of it knocked the air from his lungs. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She went on, her tone softer now, but more dangerous for it. "I don't want your pity, cowboy. I don't want your shame. I want your word kept. Because a man who breaks his word is nothing." His fists clenched at his sides. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." She reached out, her fingers brushing the scar on his forearm. "I'm asking you to remember that night by the river wasn't just yours to forget. It was mine to remember. And I have." For the first time, his eyes dropped, unable to meet hers. Shame pressed heavy on him, thicker than the whiskey that had dulled his nights. He wanted to deny her again, to push her away, but he couldn't. Not with her standing here, her voice steady, her gaze unyielding. "You've carried it this long," he muttered. "Why come now?" "Because running is over," she said simply. "Because I won't let our child's promise die with silence." Her words hit like a gunshot. He stared at her, stunned. Not a child someday, not if the stars allow, but our child. She already spoke as though it were a truth waiting to be born. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the air heavy, his chest tight. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he couldn't give her what she demanded. But the words stuck. Deep down, some part of him, the part that remembered her laughter, the warmth of that night, wanted to believe. She stepped back then, her task done. "You don't have to answer tonight," she said quietly. "But the river doesn't forget. Neither do I." With that, she turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. The cowboy sank onto the bed, his hands trembling. Her presence lingered in the air. Her words burned into his mind. He stared at the revolver on the table, then at the empty bottle by his boots. Neither could shield him from the truth. He whispered into the darkness, a confession no one could hear. "I did promise." And for the first time, he wondered if keeping it might not be the curse he feared, but the salvation he had never dared seek. The Apache girl leaves him shaken, forcing him to admit the promise was real. Now alone in the dark, he must confront whether to honor his vow or keep running from it until it destroys him. The morning sun rose harsh and unforgiving, baking the town in gold and dust. The cowboy had barely slept. He sat on the edge of his bed, boots half-laced, staring at the revolver resting on the table. No matter how he tried, he couldn't shake her words. "You promised." Each time he replayed it, his chest tightened. It wasn't just the memory of her voice. It was the truth in it. A man without his word was nothing, and he knew it. But still, the thought of binding himself, of surrendering to a promise he had once made so carelessly, twisted like a knife in his gut. The knock at his door was different this time. Loud, sharp, commanding. He rose and opened it to find the sheriff. His hat was low, his jaw set tight. "We've got trouble," the sheriff said. Down on the main street, riders were coming fast, dust clouds trailing behind them. A gang of 6 men, hard-eyed, rough, rifles across their saddles. Their leader wore a red bandana and a pistol belt heavy with iron. "They've been raiding camps," the sheriff muttered, his tone grim. "And they don't care if it's settlers or Apache. They'll take what they want." The cowboy's stomach dropped. The girl, her people's camp was only a few miles east, near the river. The gang thundered into town, horses snorting, hooves striking sparks from the stones. The leader reined in hard at the saloon, his men fanning out. He grinned, teeth yellow, eyes cruel. "Morning, gentlemen. We'll be helping ourselves today." The townsfolk shrank back, fear plain on their faces. The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster, but he was outnumbered. The cowboy's eyes swept the gang, then shifted to the road beyond. His thoughts burned. If they were here, they'd be heading toward the Apache next. Toward her. The leader caught his glance. "What's this?" he sneered. "Got yourself a sweetheart out there in the hills. Maybe we'll pay her a visit." Laughter erupted from the gang, sharp and ugly. The cowboy's blood ran hot. He stepped forward before he could stop himself, his voice rough. "Leave them out of this." The leader's grin widened. "Well now, isn't that interesting? Looks like the cowboy's got a secret. Maybe we should see what makes her worth protecting." The girl's face flashed in his mind, the fire in her eyes, the weight of her words. "You can deny me before them, but not before yourself." He couldn't let the gang ride on. But standing meant binding himself, not just to her promise, but to everything it carried. The sheriff's hand tightened on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this. Not your fight." But the cowboy shook his head, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "It is my fight." He stepped into the street, facing the riders alone. Dust swirled around his boots, the heat pressing hard. His hand hovered over his revolver. "If you go near that camp, you'll answer to me." For a moment, silence. Then the leader laughed, the sound harsh as breaking glass. "One man standing against 6. You must be touched in the head." The cowboy's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe, but I'll still be the one standing when it's done." The men shifted uneasily. They'd seen his kind before, silent, steady, dangerous, the kind that didn't bluff. The leader's grin faltered, just for a heartbeat. He spat into the dust, then jerked his head. "Mount up. We'll let this dog bark for now. But mark my words, next time, we don't ride past. We ride through." The gang wheeled their horses and thundered back out of town, the threat hanging heavy in the air. The sheriff exhaled, sweat beading on his brow. "You just made yourself a target." The cowboy holstered his gun, his jaw tight. "Doesn't matter. They were already heading for her camp." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Her. So it's true then." The cowboy didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was admission enough. That evening, he rode hard toward the river, dust rising behind him. When he reached the Apache camp, he found her waiting by the fire, as though she had known he would come. "You stood for me today," she said softly, her gaze searching his. He dismounted, his face drawn, his heart heavy. "I didn't have a choice." Her lips curved, half smile, half wound. "No, you didn't, because the river remembers." "And so do you." He stared at her, the storm inside finally breaking into words. "If I stand with you, there's no turning back." She held his gaze, unflinching. "Then don't turn back." The night deepened around them, the fire crackling, the promise between them no longer hidden but alive. Dangerous, impossible to ignore. The cowboy defies a gang of raiders to protect the Apache camp, tying his fate to the girl's promise. Now, with enemies closing in, he must choose not just survival, but where and with whom he belongs. The Apache camp stirred uneasy that night. Fires burned low, warriors sharpened blades in silence, and mothers pulled children close. Word had already reached them of the raiders in town, men who would not hesitate to steal, burn, or kill. Every glance toward the tree line carried the same question: when would the attack come? The cowboy sat near the fire, his hat pulled low, revolver resting across his knees. He didn't belong there, not really, yet no one had asked him to leave. The people watched him with wary eyes, but the girl sat beside him, her presence like a shield against their doubt. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice low. "Your people don't need a man like me bringing trouble to their door." Her dark eyes didn't flinch. "You think trouble wasn't already coming? Those men have taken from camps before. They would have come whether you stood or not." He clenched his jaw, staring into the flames. "Then I've painted a target on my back for nothing." She shook her head. "No, you showed them you wouldn't run. That matters." Her words cut through him sharper than any blade. For years, running had been his only way of living, drifting from town to town, never planting roots, never letting promises take hold. But tonight, sitting by her fire, the weight of her gaze steady on him, he felt something different, something like belonging. A rustle stirred at the edge of camp. The warriors tensed, hands gripping spears and rifles. The cowboy rose, revolver ready, but it was only a scout returning, his face grim. "They ride tonight," the scout reported. 10, maybe more, coming this way. A ripple of dread moved through the camp. Women whispered hurried prayers. Warriors exchanged sharp nods. The elder rose slowly, his voice steady despite the fear around him. "Then we meet them here. This time, we do not flee." The cowboy's pulse quickened. 10 men, armed and ruthless, against a handful of warriors with old rifles and blades. It wasn't a fair fight. Yet as he looked at the girl, standing tall despite the fear in her eyes, he knew fleeing wasn't an option for him either. The elder's gaze turned to him. "You are not of us, cowboy. Why stay?" He tightened his grip on his revolver, the memory of the promise burning in his chest. "Because running has cost me more than fighting ever did, and because I gave her my word." The warriors exchanged glances. Some frowned, others nodded, but none objected. The girl's eyes softened, though her voice carried iron. "Then you are bound now, not by fear, but by truth." Night deepened. The camp moved like a silent machine. Fires dimmed, weapons prepared, children led into the woods. The cowboy stood at the edge with the warriors, scanning the darkness. His heart pounded, but not from fear of dying. It pounded because for the first time in years, he had something worth dying for. The distant thunder of hooves broke the silence. Torches flickered between the trees, voices rough with laughter and threats. The raiders were coming fast. The cowboy steadied his revolver, his voice low to the men beside him. "Wait until they cross the clearing, don't waste a shot." The warriors nodded, trusting him without words. The riders burst from the tree line, whooping, guns raised. The camp held its breath, then erupted. Rifles cracked, arrows hissed, shouts split the night. 2 raiders fell before they even cleared the brush, their bodies tumbling into the dirt. The cowboy fired, his bullet striking a rider square in the chest. Another came at him, pistol blazing, but he dropped low, rolling to the side, returning fire that sent the man crashing from his horse. Chaos consumed the clearing, smoke, screams, sparks from torches flung wild. Warriors fought with desperate fury, blades flashing in the torchlight. The raiders pressed hard, but the camp did not break. In the heart of it, the cowboy and the Apache girl found themselves back to back. She held a bow, her arrows flying sharp and sure. He fired, reloaded, fired again, each shot driven not by survival alone, but by the vow he carried. "You don't have to stand with me," she shouted over the din. He glanced at her, sweat and dust streaking his face, his revolver steady. "I already do." Her lips curved, fierce and proud. "Then stand until the end." The battle raged on, the outcome uncertain, but one truth had already been sealed in the fire and blood, that the cowboy was no longer running. He was bound, to her, and to the promise he had tried so hard to forget. The raiders crash into the Apache camp, battle exploding around them. The cowboy and the girl fight side by side, their bond no longer hidden but forged in blood. The night will decide whether their promise lives or dies with them. The clearing roared with chaos. Gunfire cracked sharp, arrows whistled, torches flared, horses screamed as they toppled, men cursed as steel met flesh. The Apache camp had turned into a storm of fire and dust, each heartbeat a question of survival. The cowboy fought like a man possessed. His revolver barked again and again until the cylinder clicked empty. He swung it like a club, smashing the jaw of a raider who lunged at him. Blood spattered across his shirt, smoke stung his eyes, but he refused to falter. Beside him, the Apache girl loosed arrows with deadly precision. She moved like the river itself, fluid, relentless, inevitable. When a raider closed in, blade raised, She didn't flinch. The cowboy lunged between them, taking the blow across his arm. Pain burned white-hot, but he shoved the man back, driving his knife deep until the threat fell still. "You're hurt," she cried, reaching for him. He gritted his teeth, blood running down his sleeve. "It'll hold. Keep shooting." Her gaze burned with something fiercer than fear, faith. She didn't argue. She nocked another arrow, releasing it into the dark. The raiders pressed harder, circling, firing into the lodges, setting hides ablaze. Flames climbed the poles, smoke curling into the night. The camp was moments from being overrun. The elder shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Fall back to the river!" Warriors pulled children and elders toward the trees, fighting to cover their retreat. But the cowboy knew if they fell back now, the raiders would cut them down before they reached the water. Someone had to hold the line. His eyes swept the chaos. The gang leader was there, red bandana glowing in the firelight, pistol barking, laughter wild. He wasn't just raiding. He was hunting, savoring the terror. The cowboy's chest tightened. He remembered the sheriff's warning. Words weigh as heavy as bullets. He thought of the girl's eyes, steady in the fire. "You promised." The promise wasn't just hers now, it was his. He grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "Take them to the river. Protect the children." She shook her head fiercely. "Not without you." His grip tightened. "If I fall, let me fall here. Don't waste it. Go." Her lips parted, trembling between fury and grief. But she saw the truth in his eyes. He had already chosen. Reluctantly, she pulled away, shouting for the others. The last of the villagers streamed toward the trees, her bow covering their retreat. She turned once, her gaze locking with his, a silent vow passing between them. Then she was gone, swallowed by the shadows. The cowboy turned back to the fire, his revolver empty, his knife slick. The raiders surged. He stood alone in the center of the camp, dust swirling around his boots, flames painting him in gold and red. The leader sneered, dismounting. "One man against us all. You're either the bravest fool alive or the deadest." The cowboy squared his shoulders, pain forgotten, his voice steady as iron. "I've been a fool before. Tonight, I'll be more." He lunged into the fray. He fought with everything he had left, fists, boots, steel. He ducked rifle swings, drove elbows into jaws, rammed shoulders into chests. He moved not like a man trying to survive, but like a man who had finally found something worth dying for. Every strike carried memory. The girl by the river, her voice under the stars, the promise he had buried for years. Each blow was a vow renewed. The leader closed in, pistol raised. The cowboy tackled him, the two crashing into the dirt. They grappled, fists flying, dust choking. The pistol skittered out of reach. The leader drew a knife, driving it down. The cowboy caught his wrist, muscles straining, the blade inches from his throat. "You can't stop us," the leader snarled. "You'll break like the rest." The cowboy's teeth bared, his strength born of fury and truth. "Not tonight." With a roar, he twisted the knife aside, slamming his forehead into the man's skull. The leader collapsed, dazed, his grip loosening. The cowboy wrested the blade free, pressing it to the man's chest, ready to end it. But he froze. He remembered the girl's words. "I don't want your pity. I want your word kept." Killing would not keep it. Standing would. He dropped the knife into the dirt, rising tall despite his wounds. He shouted into the chaos, his voice carrying over the battle. "This fight ends here. Leave, or you die with me." For a heartbeat, silence. Then fear rippled through the raiders. They had expected him to break, to run, to beg. But here he stood, bloodied, broken, unyielding. One by one, their courage faltered. They grabbed their wounded, mounted their horses, and fled into the night. The leader stumbled after them, hatred burning in his eyes but no fight left in his body. The cowboy stood alone amid the flames, chest heaving, revolver hanging useless at his side. He had not chased them. He had not killed. He had only stood. And in that standing, he had won. The raiders retreat, broken but not destroyed, and the cowboy collapses amid the flames, alive, but unsure if his strength will hold long enough to see the girl again. The camp smoldered, its lodges charred, its air thick with smoke and blood. The battle had ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. The cowboy stood swaying in the center, his revolver limp in his hand, his body streaked with dust and crimson. Every breath rattled like broken glass. From the tree line, shadows emerged. Warriors first, bows drawn, eyes sharp, expecting to finish a fight. But then they saw the raiders gone, the cowboy standing alone among the ashes. Slowly, they lowered their weapons. The girl rushed past them, her braid flying behind her, her bow still in hand. She stopped short at the sight of him. He looked like a ghost, half dead, blood soaking his shirt, smoke clinging to his skin. Yet his eyes found hers, steady, alive. "You came back?" he rasped, his voice nearly gone. She crossed the clearing in a heartbeat, catching him as his knees buckled. His weight sagged into her, heavy with exhaustion. She pulled him toward what was left of a lodge, easing him down onto a blanket spread across the dirt. Her hands worked quickly, tearing strips of cloth, binding his wounds. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice stayed firm. "You should be dead." He gave a faint, crooked smile, wincing. "Should have been. But I remembered what you said. Stand until the end." Her hands stilled for a moment, her breath catching. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, the wall between them cracked. He had not run. He had not denied. He had stood, bleeding, burning, unyielding. The elder approached, his staff tapping against the stones. He surveyed the wreckage, the fallen raiders left behind, the flames dying slow. His eyes turned to the cowboy, and his voice carried for all to hear. "This man is not of our blood," the elder said, "but he has bled with us. He has fought where others would have fled. He carries not just his word, Fagis, but ours now." The people murmured, some nodding, some uncertain, but none could deny what they had seen. The girl rose to her feet, her eyes flashing. "He is bound to me. He gave me his vow long ago, and tonight he kept it, not with words, but with his life." The cowboy looked up at her, stunned. She was not shaming him now, not demanding before a crowd. She was claiming him, binding him to her in front of all. The elder studied them both, then gave a single nod. "Then so it shall be." The murmurs grew louder, shifting from doubt to acceptance. Women began to gather the wounded. Children peeked from hiding. Warriors stamped out the last of the flames. Life, fragile but stubborn, began to stir again. The girl knelt beside him once more, her hands gentle now, her voice softer. "You can't run anymore, not from me, not from this." His throat tightened, his eyes burning, though no tears came. "I don't want to run," she smiled faintly, though her eyes still glistened. "Then you've already kept your promise." He reached for her hand, their fingers entwining, stained with soot and blood. In that simple touch, the vow that had once been spoken under the stars was sealed again, this time not in secret, but in fire, blood, and truth. The night wore on, and the camp settled into uneasy rest. The wounded were tended, the dead honored, the survivors gathered close. The cowboy lay beneath the open sky, the girl's hand never leaving his. Pain pulsed through every bone, but for the first time in years, his heart was steady. Above them, the stars shone clear through the smoke, the same stars that had witnessed his reckless vow by the river. But now, their light felt different, not mocking, not accusing, but bearing witness to a promise fulfilled. And though the danger was not gone, the raiders could return, others could come. The cowboy knew he would not face it alone. He had given his word, and at last he had learned what it meant to keep it. The cowboy survives the battle, claimed by the Apache girl as hers before all. But even as their bond is sealed, the shadow of more conflict looms, because promises kept invite new trials. Dawn broke grey and heavy over the camp. Smoke still curled from the burned lodges, the ground littered with charred wood and broken arrows. The air carried the sharp tang of blood and ash. Yet despite the ruin, the people moved with quiet determination, patching hides, gathering herbs for the wounded, leading horses back from the woods. Life, stubborn as stone, pressed on. The cowboy rose slowly, every muscle aching, his bandaged arms stiff. The Apache girl hovered close, steadying him when his knees threatened to give. He wanted to refuse her help, to show he could still stand, but the truth was written in his body. Without her hand, he would have collapsed. The villagers watched as he passed. Their eyes carried mixed weight, gratitude for his fight, suspicion for his presence, questions that lingered unspoken. He was the man who had stood for them, but also the outsider who had nearly brought fire to their door. At the river's edge, the elder waited. His staff rested against a rock, his gaze fixed on the water. The cowboy approached, heart pounding. He felt as though the battle last night had been easier than this moment. "You fought," the elder said without turning. You bled. Without you, more of us would have fallen. For that, we honor you. The cowboy exhaled, some of the weight lifting, but the elder's voice sharpened. Yet honor is not the same as trust. You have walked between two worlds, and men like that often belong to neither. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He had heard those words before, in towns that spat at him, in saloons that turned their backs, in his own restless nights. Always an outsider, never rooted. The girl stepped forward, her voice steady. He belongs here, with me. The elder's gaze shifted to her, softer but no less stern. Your heart speaks boldly, but hearts are not enough to hold a people together. He must prove himself, not in battle, but in life. The cowboy frowned. What do you mean? The elder turned fully now, his eyes sharp. Words and blood win a night. But can you chop wood when winter comes? Can you guide children to safety when wolves circle? Can you share food when your own belly is empty? That is what binds us. Not fire, not guns, sacrifice. The words struck deep. The cowboy had never lived for more than himself. He had survived, yes, but survival was not the same as belonging. Could he give what they asked? Could he live not as a drifter but as part of something greater? The girl reached for his hand, squeezing tight. You already have, she whispered. Last night, you stood not for yourself, but for us. Do it again, and you'll see. You belong. The elder studied their joined hands, then gave a slow nod. Then let him prove it. And so the days that followed became trial. The cowboy worked alongside the men, repairing lodges, hauling water from the river, gathering wood until his shoulders burned. At first, the others eyed him with suspicion, waiting for him to falter, to walk away. But he did not. Each morning he rose with the sun. Each night he worked until his wounds bled through the bandages. When a child fell into the river's current, it was the cowboy who dove in, dragging the boy back to shore despite the pain screaming through his ribs. When food grew scarce, he offered his share first, refusing meat until the children had eaten. Slowly, the eyes around him began to change. Suspicion softened into respect. Gratitude hardened into acceptance. The whispers faded, replaced by nods of acknowledgement. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the girl sat with him by the fire. Her voice was soft, but her words carried weight. Do you see now? Belonging isn't given, it's earned, and you've begun to earn it. He looked at her, her face lit gold by the flames. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest that wasn't restlessness or guilt. It was peace, fragile, but real. Still, doubt lingered. He stared into the fire, voice low. They'll never forget I'm not one of them. She leaned closer, her hand resting on his. No, but they'll remember you kept your promise, and that matters more than blood. Her words wrapped around him like the river's current. Steady, inescapable. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe she might be right. The peace in the valley was fragile, like a thin sheet of ice stretched over deep water. For several days, the camp worked in steady rhythm, mending lodges, hunting small game, gathering roots along the river. Children laughed again, women sang while grinding corn, and the air carried something close to calm. But calm never lasted long on the frontier. One afternoon, as the cowboy chopped wood near the riverbank, a scout returned in haste. His horse lathered, his eyes hard. He slid from the saddle, speaking rapid words to the elder. The village quieted, work pausing, every ear straining. The elder's face darkened. He turned toward the people. The raiders that fled have not vanished. They've gathered others. They ride again, stronger. A ripple of fear spread through the camp. Women clutched their children. Men gripped their weapons tighter. The cowboy froze, the axe hanging limp in his hands. He had known this was coming. He had seen the hatred in the leader's eyes as he fled. Some men ran, but others came back with vengeance. The girl moved to his side, her expression fierce but calm. You knew, didn't you? He nodded slowly. A man like him doesn't let go. Not after being beaten, not after being shamed. She studied him, then asked the question he had been avoiding. Then will you stand again? His throat tightened. He thought of the promise, of her eyes under the stars, of the blood he had already spilled. Part of him wanted to flee, to ride hard and vanish into the wide plains where no one could find him. But another part, the part she had woken, knew he could not run. I'll stand, he said hoarsely, but this time, it won't be just me. That night, The council gathered in the central lodge. Warriors sat cross-legged, firelight flickering across their painted faces. The elder spoke gravely. "We are strong in spirit, but their numbers outmatch ours. We must be clever, or we will fall." The cowboy listened, then leaned forward. "You can't face them head-on. That's what they want. You have to use the land, make it fight for you." The warriors eyed him with suspicion, but the elder gestured for him to go on. He drew lines in the dirt with a stick. Here, by the narrow pass, set traps, fences of sharpened wood, ditches covered with brush, forced them to choke their numbers. He marked another line. "Archers in the trees, rifles hidden along the ridge. When they're trapped, we strike from all sides." The room was silent. Then one warrior spoke. "You think like them, like a raider." The cowboy's gaze hardened. "I've ridden with men like them. I know how they think, and I know how to break them." The elder studied him, then nodded slowly. "Then we fight with both heart and cunning." Over the next 2 days, the camp transformed into a fortress. Warriors dug pits and lined them with sharpened stakes. Women wove brush to cover the traps. The cowboy worked beside them, his hands blistered, his back aching, his mind sharp. At night, he sat with the girl by the fire. She watched him silently, then said, "You've changed." He gave a tired smile. "Maybe I finally remembered who I was meant to be." Her hand found his, warm and steady. "Not just who you were meant to be, who you promised to be." The words rooted in him deeper than any wound. On the third morning, the scouts returned again. Dust rose on the horizon. The raiders were coming. Twice as many this time, their leader riding at the front with his red bandana and a hatred that burned brighter than the sun. The people braced themselves, weapons ready, hearts pounding. The cowboy stood among them, revolver on his hip, rifle slung across his back. He was not just a wanderer now. He was their wall, their shield, their promise. The elder raised his staff, his voice carrying over the valley. "Tonight, we do not flee. Tonight, we show them this land is not theirs to take." The cowboy's eyes fixed on the dust cloud, on the riders thundering closer. His heart hammered, but his stance was steady. The girl stood at his side, bow in hand, gaze fierce. The ground trembled as the raiders drew near. The traps lay waiting, hidden beneath leaves and shadow. The air thickened with smoke and dust. The leader's voice rang out, sharp with rage. "This time, none of you leave alive." The cowboy lifted his rifle, his voice low but unyielding. "Then let's finish it." The thunder of hooves rolled through the valley like a storm. Dust boiled up from the pass as the raiders charged, their torches blazing, rifles cracking in wild defiance. At their front rode the leader, red bandana whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the Apache camp with burning hatred. Hidden along the ridge, the cowboy crouched behind a boulder, rifle steady. He could feel the earth trembling beneath him, the beat of the horses hammering through his chest. His jaw clenched, breath slow. Everything they had built, everything they had prepared, came down to these next moments. "Wait," he murmured. The warriors beside him held their bows taut, rifles loaded, but none moved. The traps had to be sprung at the right time. Too early and the raiders would break free. Too late and the village would burn. The riders roared closer, the leader raising his pistol high. "Burn it all," he bellowed. The first horses crossed the hidden line. The cowboy's hand shot up. "Now!" The ground exploded. Brush collapsed, revealing pits lined with sharpened stakes. Screams tore the air as horses stumbled. Riders pitched forward into the traps. Chaos rippled through the raiders' line. From the trees, Apache arrows rained down. Rifles cracked sharp, each shot deliberate. Men toppled from saddles, torches falling useless into the dirt. The cowboy fired from the ridge, his bullet striking a raider through the shoulder. He reloaded fast, firing again, dropping another. The air filled with smoke and fury, but for the first time, the fight tilted in their favor. Still, the raiders pressed hard. The leader drove his horse through the chaos, rallying his men. "Push through! They're nothing but shadows!" The cowboy shifted position, his rifle sight locking on the man's chest. His finger tightened, but the leader's horse veered at the last second, the shot grazing his arm instead. He snarled, eyes finding the cowboy on the ridge. "You!" Bullets ripped into the rocks around him, shards flying. The cowboy ducked low, rolling behind cover. The warriors beside him fired back, holding the line. Below, the raiders regrouped, forcing their way past the traps. They charged into the clearing, torches swinging, blades flashing. The camp erupted in close combat. Warriors grappling, women defending children with spears, fire catching on half-burned lodges. The cowboy dropped from the ridge, hitting the ground hard, revolver drawn. He fought his way through the chaos, every shot deliberate, every strike fueled by something deeper than survival. He reached the center just as the leader dismounted, his pistol blazing, cutting down 2 warriors in an instant. His eyes burned with single-minded fury. "Where is he? Where's the coward who shamed me?" The cowboy stepped forward, revolver in hand. "Right here." Their eyes locked, the crowd parting around them as if the battle itself bent to their collision. The leader grinned through blood. "This time, I finish it." They circled, the air thick with smoke and screams. The cowboy's arm throbbed, his ribs ached, but his stance was steady. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for her, for the promise, for the people who had given him a place when he had none. The leader fired first. The shot grazed the cowboy's shoulder, spinning him back. Pain roared, but he stayed upright, returning fire. The bullet struck the leader's thigh, dropping him to one knee. He roared, forcing himself up, charging with a knife drawn. They collided, grappling in the dirt, fists and steel slamming. The knife slashed across the cowboy's side, but he drove his knee into the man's gut, wrenching the blade aside. They rolled, dust choking, the world narrowing to 2 men bound by hatred and pride. Around them, the battle raged. The Apache fought with desperate courage, pushing the raiders back step by step. But all eyes flicked toward the struggle at the center, knowing the outcome would decide more than just one life. The cowboy pinned the leader's arm, slamming his fist into his jaw once, twice, until blood spattered the dirt. The knife dropped. He seized it, holding it high, ready to end it. The leader spat blood, sneering even through broken teeth. "Do it. Kill me. Prove you're no better." The cowboy froze, the knife trembling in his grip. He remembered the girl's voice, steady as the river. "I don't want your pity. I want your word kept." His word wasn't to kill. His word was to stand. With a roar, he drove the knife into the dirt beside the man's head, inches from his skull. He rose, chest heaving, revolver leveled at the leader's face. "Leave. Now, or next time, I won't miss." The leader's eyes widened, rage and fear clashing. He staggered back, clutching his bleeding thigh. Around him, the raiders faltered, their courage broken. One by one, they fled, dragging their wounded, their torches dropping into the dirt. The clearing fell silent, but for the ragged breaths of the survivors. The Apache stood battered but unbroken, their eyes turning to the cowboy. He lowered his revolver, exhaustion washing over him. His knees buckled, but the girl was there, catching him before he fell. Her arms held him steady, her voice fierce and soft all at once. "You kept it, you stood." The elder raised his staff, his voice carrying, "Tonight, the raiders are broken, and this man, once a wanderer, has become more than a promise. He has become our shield." The people cheered, their voices rising with the crackle of dying flames. The cowboy closed his eyes, her hand warm against his chest. The promise no longer a burden, but a bond. The raiders are defeated, their leader humiliated once again, but spared. The cowboy, bloodied and near collapse, has proven himself beyond doubt. Yet sparing the enemy may leave danger lingering in the shadows. The valley was quiet after the storm. Smoke drifted low, carrying the bitter stench of gunpowder and charred wood. Bodies of the fallen lay where they had dropped, some raiders, some Apache, their blood mingling with the dirt. The survivors moved slowly, tending the wounded, gathering the children, whispering prayers for the dead. The cowboy sat propped against a charred post, his shirt torn, his side bandaged hastily with strips of cloth. Every breath stabbed his ribs, but he forced himself to stay upright. He could not collapse now, not when the people's eyes kept flicking toward him, weighing, watching. The Apache girl knelt beside him, her hands stained with blood that was not her own. She dabbed a damp cloth against his brow, her voice steady though her eyes shone with worry. "You've bled enough for 10 men. You should rest." He gave a faint smile, though pain shadowed it. "Rest can wait." "Not while they're still looking to me." As if on cue, the elder approached, leaning heavily on his staff. Behind him walked warriors and women alike, their faces drawn but resolute. He stopped before the cowboy, his gaze piercing. "You stood," the elder said simply. "Not once, but twice. When fire came, you did not flee. When blood spilled, you did not break. You kept your word." The cowboy lowered his eyes. I only did what had to be done. The elder shook his head. No, many men do what they must for a night. Few do it for a people not their own. You are no longer an outsider here. You are bound to us, by blood, by fight, and by promise. A murmur rippled through the gathered villagers. Some nodded, others frowned, but none denied the truth of what they had seen. The girl rose to her feet, her voice ringing clear. He is mine. He gave me his vow long ago, and tonight he sealed it with his life. If you accept me as your daughter, then you must accept him as your son. The words cut through the air like an arrow. The cowboy looked up sharply, his breath catching. She had spoken what he had not dared to believe, that she was not just binding him to herself, but to her people. The elder studied them both for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. So it shall be. Relief and pride washed over the girl's face. She knelt beside the cowboy once more, taking his hand firmly in hers. Her voice softened, but carried the same iron as her public claim. No more running, no more hiding. You are mine, and I am yours. And together, we belong here. He squeezed her hand weakly, his throat tightening. For years, he had drifted, nameless, tied to nothing. But now, through fire and blood, he had been given something greater than survival. He had been given belonging. The days that followed were filled with both grief and rebuilding. Graves were dug by the river, the dead laid to rest beneath songs older than memory. Children placed stones atop the mounds. Women wove garlands of sage and wildflowers. The cowboy stood among them, hat in hand, his chest heavy with the weight of lives lost. But even amid mourning, life pushed forward. Lodges were rebuilt, fires rekindled, the sound of axes and hammers filling the air. The cowboy worked with the others, hauling timber, binding hides, his body screaming with pain, but his spirit anchored. At night, he sat by the river with the girl. The stars stretched wide above them, the same stars that had once borne witness to his reckless vow. Now their light seemed softer, kinder, as though approving of what had come to pass. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. He frowned. "Regret what?" "Standing, staying, binding yourself to me." His arm tightened around her. "No, I regret only that it took me so long to see the truth." Her lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes glistening in the starlight. "Then remember it always. Because promises forgotten bring only pain, but promises kept bring life." The river whispered beside them, carrying her words downstream, as if etching them into the land itself. Still, in the shadows of the night, doubt lingered. The raiders had fled, yes, but the leader still breathed, and hatred rarely died quietly. The cowboy knew this peace was fragile, that danger would return, but for the first time in his life, he did not fear it, because he would not face it alone. The cowboy is finally claimed as part of the community and bound to the Apache Girl. Yet even as peace settles over the valley, the threat of the raiders' return hangs like a shadow, promising that his vow will be tested again. The night was calm, almost too calm. The rebuilt lodges glowed faintly with firelight, the sound of children's laughter returning little by little. The cowboy sat at the edge of the camp, cleaning his revolver, the girl beside him weaving leather strands into a braid. For a brief moment, it almost felt as if peace had truly taken root. But peace never lasted long in the frontier. The warning came with the howl of a coyote, sharp and sudden. Scouts rushed in from the tree line, their voices urgent. Riders, a small band, coming fast. The cowboy's chest tightened. He had known this moment would come. The leader of the raiders had fled twice, humiliated, broken, but men like him never stayed down. Hatred was fuel, and fuel always burned until it consumed everything. The camp erupted into movement. Warriors seized rifles. Women pulled children into hiding. The elder raised his staff, calling for calm. The cowboy stood slowly, revolver in hand, his body stiff with old wounds, but his stance unbroken. From the shadows at the edge of the valley, riders emerged. Not many this time, just a handful, but at their front was the leader, red bandana wrapped tight, his arm bound in bloodied cloth, his face scarred and twisted with rage. He reined in hard, his voice cutting through the night. "I came for one man. The rest of you can live if you give him to me." The villagers stirred, eyes turning toward the cowboy. He felt their gaze heavy on his back, but no fear rose in him, only resolve. He stepped forward, out of the circle of firelight into the open. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady. The leader sneered, swinging down from his horse. "You've stolen from me twice. My men, my pride. Tonight, I take it back in your blood." The cowboy's grip tightened on his revolver. "This isn't about me anymore. It never was. You came here chasing greed. I stand here because I gave my word." The leader's laugh was low, bitter. "A promise to a woman. To a people not your own. That's what you die for." The cowboy's jaw set. "It's what I live for." The two men circled in the dust, the camp silent, every eye fixed on them. No one moved to interfere. This was more than a fight. It was an ending written long before tonight. The leader struck first, his pistol flashing. The shot grazed the cowboy's side, burning across old scars. He staggered but did not fall, firing back. His bullet tore through the leader's shoulder, spinning him, but not dropping him. They closed the distance fast, guns forgotten, fists and knives taking over. They grappled in the dirt, grunting, snarling like animals. The leader slammed a fist into the cowboy's jaw, driving him back. The cowboy countered with a blow to the ribs, the crack audible in the silence. The knife flashed in the leader's hand. He slashed, the blade cutting shallow across the cowboy's chest. Pain seared, blood soaking his shirt, but the cowboy seized his wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the ground. They rolled, dust rising around them. The leader clawed, bit, struck with savage fury, but the cowboy fought with something deeper: memory, promise, belonging. Every blow was not just for survival, but for her, for the people who had finally given him a home. The leader pinned him, fist raised for the killing strike. His voice roared with hatred. "For you should have run, boy. You should have stayed nothing." The cowboy's eyes burned. He drove his head forward, smashing into the man's face. The leader reeled, blood streaming. The cowboy surged up, fists flying, striking again and again until the man collapsed beneath him. Silence fell. Dust hung thick. The leader lay sprawled, broken, his chest heaving. The cowboy stood over him, revolver in hand, the barrel steady at his enemy's heart. The camp held its breath. The leader spat blood, his voice a rasp. "Do it. Kill me. Be the savage they already think you are." The cowboy's finger hovered on the trigger. His breath came hard, his vision tunneling. He thought of all the blood already spilled, of the girl's eyes watching, of the vow that had carried him through fire and pain. "I don't want your pity. I want your word kept." Killing him would end one man. Sparing him would end the cycle. The cowboy lowered the revolver. His voice rang clear. "No, you'll live with your shame. That's worse than death." Gasps rippled through the villagers. The leader's eyes widened, disbelief and rage clashing. He struggled to rise, but the warriors closed in, seizing him, dragging him away. He fought, cursed, spat, but he was finished. The cowboy stood in the center of the camp, his revolver hanging at his side, his chest heaving. The girl came to him, her hand finding his, her voice steady. "You didn't kill him. You kept your word to me and to yourself." He looked at her, his throat thick, his heart raw. For the first time, he believed it. The elder raised his staff, his voice carrying, "Tonight, the last shadow of this threat is broken. Tonight, we see not a wanderer, not a stranger, but a man of his word." The people's voices rose in a cheer, their song carrying into the night. The cowboy closed his eyes, her hand warm in his. The battle was over. The promise was kept. The cowboy defeats the leader but spares his life, choosing word over blood. In that moment, he proves his transformation, not a drifter, but a man bound by truth, love, and belonging. The valley breathed again. The smoke from the battle drifted into the hills, leaving the air clean, the stars bright above. The lodges glowed with quiet firelight, and for the first time in weeks, no sound of hooves or gunfire disturbed the night. Only the river's steady voice carried on, endless, eternal. The cowboy stood at the edge of the camp, his revolver finally holstered, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken. The Apache girl stood beside him, her hand in his, her eyes watching the water. Neither spoke for a long time. Words weren't needed. The silence itself was sacred. Behind them, the people gathered. Children clung to their mothers, warriors cleaned their weapons, elders whispered prayers. The enemy was gone. More than that, the curse of running, hiding, and bleeding had been broken. The camp had survived, not because of fear, but because of unity. The elder stepped forward, his staff tapping softly against the earth. He looked at the cowboy, his weathered face solemn. "You had every chance to kill him," he said, "yet you did not." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Killing him wouldn't have ended the hate. It would have made me no different than him." The elder nodded slowly. "Then you understand what few men ever do, that strength is not in how many you strike down, but in how many you lift up." The people murmured their agreement. For the first time, there was no doubt in their eyes. The man who had once been a wanderer was no longer a stranger. He was one of them. The girl's fingers tightened around his. She turned, her gaze steady, proud. "He is mine," she said simply, her words carrying for all to hear. "And I am his, not by chance, but by promise." The cowboy's throat burned, emotion rising sharper than any wound. He had drifted for years, nameless, rootless, bound to nothing. But tonight, he had something more powerful than land or gold. He had a bond that even fire and blood couldn't break. The people cheered softly, their voices rising into a chant. It wasn't just a celebration of victory. It was a welcome, a binding, a recognition that he had found his place at last. In the days that followed, the camp began to heal. Lodges were rebuilt, fields replanted. Children laughed again in the open. The cowboy worked beside them, his hands blistered, his body aching, but his heart steady. He was no longer running, he was building. At night, he and the girl sat by the river, the stars reflected in the water, the same stars that had borne witness to their first promise. Now they bore witness to its fulfillment. She leaned against him, her voice quiet. "Do you remember that night by the river, when you promised me a child?" He smiled faintly, his arm around her. "I remember every word, and I intend to keep them all." She closed her eyes, peace softening her face. "Then the river remembers too." The cowboy gazed at the water, its current carrying forward without end. He thought of all the miles he had traveled, all the nights he had wasted running from himself, and he knew his journey had led him here, not by chance but by promise. For the first time, he was not afraid of tomorrow, because tomorrow he would not face alone. This story is more than a tale of blood and fire. It is a reminder. Promises are not words to be spoken lightly. They are threads that bind hearts, families, and entire peoples together. The cowboy tried to bury his vow, but in the end, it was that vow that gave him a home, a purpose, and a life worth fighting for. So ask yourself, what promises have you made, and which of them still wait to be kept? If this story touched you, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another journey of love, sacrifice, and redemption. And before you leave, don't let the river of stories stop here. Click on the next video on your screen. You'll find another tale just as powerful, waiting for you.